everyone. It's Carmen Mazzara from APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. I'm so excited to see all of you for day 5 of the APSIA Diversity Forum. It's a little sad because it's technically the end of our week together, but it's also exciting because it's the beginning of all of our ongoing time together. So I very much hope that all of you will stay connected to us and stay involved. You should have received, many of you last week, a list of some of the great tools and resources that APSIA has to help you as we continue this conversation and you continue this journey. You'll receive another link later today with those lists again, but we are absolutely here to be a resource for you, to talk through things, to be as much help as we can as you navigate this journey. We, of course, would not be able to do any of this without the amazing APSIA team, Brianna Suarez and Melina Perez in particular. And we're very glad that they are such a key part of APSIA's work. We would also not be able to do this, of course, without the many funders and investors who make the Diversity Forum possible. In particular, I want to celebrate the University of Washington Jackson School, University of Southern California's Master Public Diplomacy Program, Texas A&M's Bush School, the Maxwell School at Syracuse, the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton, Open Society Foundations, McLarty Associates, Johns Hopkins SAIS, and the Harvard Kennedy School. So we thank them and all of the folks who make the Diversity Forum possible. If you haven't yet had a chance to explore, I want to make sure you have a copy of the program for our week. And if you missed any of the sessions that we've held throughout this week, or you just like to revisit them, you can find all of the recordings on the APSIA YouTube page. So in the chat, you'll see both links, one to the program where there's lots of great information to understand and explore, including all of our speaker bios. And you can find the recordings of the really insightful sessions we've had this week on our YouTube page. So with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Sean Williams of the Fletcher School for what I know is going to be a great way to bridge the week we've just had and all the great work we're going to do together going forward. So Sean, please.
Thank you, Carmen. Pleasure to meet everyone. Excited that you're here and excited to be a part of this myself. Just to briefly introduce myself, again, Sean Williams from the Fletcher School. I've been working in career services as an assistant director there since January, and it's been a lot of fun. Certainly love working and coaching Fletcher students, and it's been great. So let's jump into it. So the topic for today, just to remind you, is framing your narrative to be competitive for opportunities. And we have two fantastic speakers today. We have Amber Demery, and we have James Chan, who are both very well accomplished. And I'm just going to briefly read you their bios now, if you haven't seen them already. James Chan serves as the Florida State Director for the State Innovation Exchange, which is a national resource and strategy center that supports state legislators in advancing and defending progressive policies across the country. In 2019, Influence Magazine named James as a rising star in Florida politics, very impressive. And he also was named an up-and-comer under 30 by the Florida Business Journal in 2017. James earned his Master's of Public Policy at the University of Minnesota's Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs. So thank you, James, for your participation. And second, we have Amber Demery again, who is a national security specialist for the U.S. federal government. She's also a member of the national security organization, Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. Also, Amber completed a Boren Fellowship in Japan, also quite impressive, where she studied Japanese and interned with a local human rights organization. Amber received her master's degree in international relations from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. So, so before we start, just a few things to lay out here in terms of format. Firstly, I certainly invite you to turn on your cameras for the discussion, particularly if you have a question or to throw something in the chat, that would be great. It's not required, but we certainly encourage you to do that. Also, just want to remind everyone to mute your mics as well. And to give you just a general format for this session, for the next roughly half hour or so, I'm going to be posing questions as a moderator to the two panelists here, but do feel free to throw questions in the chat during. We're not going to get to those questions until 1:30ish, 1:35 or so, because again, I'll be starting out, but we will have at least 20 minutes for the panelists to consider questions as well. So that would be it. And again, just feel free to, if you have a question, throw it in the chat for now, and we'll get to it later on in the session here. So, so first question for folks, and either of you can start. Amber, James, it's really up to you. But can you first tell me about a story about yourself, and tell us in a way that really resonated with employers. If it's not an employer, perhaps a fellowship program or a graduate school, but share examples of how you sort of told your story, perhaps in an interview, that you think really resonated with employers.
I can pop in and go first. Thanks for the intro, Sean and Carmen. Yeah, so I think the way I normally try to tell my story when I'm applying for a job or for a fellowship or internship, I always try to obviously first express my interest in the opening, obviously, but also go into my qualifications. But I think what I hope to accomplish within the program. But most importantly, I always try to note like where I think I fall short and how the program will help me reach my goal that I'm hoping to achieve. Specifically, a recent application I did was for Pacific Forum Young Leaders Program. And I said, like, I have this interest in Asia, I have a background in Asia. However, I haven't been able to work on it much since I started my professional career. And I believe having access to this organization and to these people would allow me more chance to actually focus and be very specific about what I want to accomplish within this region.
I love that. Can I just interrupt you right there? That's such, from a career service perspective, that's like so spot on, right? Because what we often say to students is, right, is to not shy away from what we might consider a weakness, right? And to actually bring that forward, right? And to sort of flip the script, if you will. It's like how this weakness is actually a strength, and that, that's why I'm pursuing this position. I want to learn more. I'm excited. That's why I'm looking for this opportunity here or there. So, so that's spot on. Thank you for that. Anything else? I'm sorry to interrupt you guys.
That was basically it. I agree. I just think it's important to realize that things that we kind of consider as weaknesses usually are not. It's usually something that can make you stand out a little bit more. So lean into it.
Yeah, and turn into a positive. Perfect. James, how about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sean, and thanks, Carmen, for having me on today. I think about the time I applied for the PPIA Fellowship, or Public Policy and International Affairs Fellowship program, when I was a college junior trying to, wade my way into exploring public policy career options, right? And I didn't know what going to grad school for public policy meant. So for me, it was understanding and putting in my application very explicitly of why I was interested in applying for the PPIA program, right? And what kind of skills that I would gain, but also why do I care about public policy? I think it's important for college students and anyone applying for a job in public policy to really connect it back to the why. Why are you driven to work in public policy? Why are you willing to go into school debt to get a master's degree in public policy or in international affairs, right? And serving public good, but not making a whole ton of money on it, right? So for me, it was really connecting it to my experience being raised by a widowed immigrant mother and understanding that, I went from being in a pretty comfortable middle income family to then all of a sudden I'm in a low income family being raised by a mother who's making minimum wages at a watch factory, right? And how that really changed my perspective on the social safety net policies in this country and why it's so important for us to have diverse voices in public policy.
Wow, excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for divulging that. That was fantastic. And I think making a personal connection is always key. And then it's not just about what you can do. It's about, like you said, what's your drive? What gets you up in the morning, right? What's your North Star? And conveying those. Finding the right time, say in an interview, for example, to convey that. In addition to the more boilerplate sort of, I can do this, I can do that for you. Showing your heart and your passion. Can be equally, if not stronger, right? To sort of seal the deal, if you will. So thanks for that. Tell me, are there any intangible traits that you feel helped your application stand out? You can think of any application you applied. It could be graduate school essay, it could be their job, what have you. But there's certain skills that are intangible, such as resilience, persuasion, emotional intelligence, natural leadership. There are things that don't necessarily stand out on a job description. So can you speak to that and how effectively you were able to sort of explain those traits on your application for these different opportunities?
Sure, I can go first this time. I think something that pops to my mind is relationship building skills and group work, right? I think something that I've learned through graduate school and in my career now working with legislators and the staffers is really being able to work with all kinds of people, right? And understanding what it is that they need and also how you can help them meet their goal. And that's not something that everyone can do or do well. And it's a skill that should be practiced, right? And whether you're working in state legislature, working in national security, I think it's like you said, Sean, emotional intelligence and being able to persist in whatever you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything to add there, Amber? Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. The one I was thinking of is determination, particularly for students who are applying for fellowships. The fellowships are, they basically are there. They want to give you money to do this thing that you're interested in. And I think the best way to kind of show that, show your interest and be very specific about it is to show like how determined you are to actually accomplish what you're writing about, how determined you are to learn this language or to complete this research or to, finish your program out, your grad school program and that kind of thing. Particularly pulling on my application for the Boren Fellowship. I remember like I had contacted schools already overseas in Japan. I had contacted the human rights organization I had wanted to intern with, and I had spoken to them and chosen everything, and everything was set. All I needed was the money from Boren. So I think having that background made it very clear to them, like, oh, she's serious about this thing. She really will, she's determined to complete it and to reach her goals. And I think showing that determination in your application, which can be done usually with the written word rather than your resume, I think would be helpful.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. It's because part of it, part of this for any opportunity, right, is showing that sort of natural enthusiasm and like you said, determination. So that's and addressing it directly is perfect. I'm going to break the rules here a little bit because I see something in chat that I think would actually be great for us to kind of discuss now. The question is from Brianna. It says, can both speakers discuss their own paths into their careers from the beginning? So if you could start with that or just continue on with that would be great. I guess we could start with James. You don't mind?
Sure. So as a student at the University of Florida, there was a center called the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. And I see Billy's note about unpaid internships. So the great thing about the Bob Graham Center was that, every spring semester, they would send about 20 interns up to the state capitol in Tallahassee, Florida. It was a paid internship where, our housing was paid for. We got a very small stipend for living stipend. And so that allowed us to get the internship experience that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten, right? So I started as this intern for the Florida Education Association, working with our higher ed arm, our higher education faculty members. So they were basically union members. And I got to shadow our lobbyist. And, it was the first session with our then Governor, Rick Scott. And it was interesting to see how legislative policy is hammered out on the state level. Went off to grad school at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, got my master's in public policy. And while I was there, I interned at Target Corporation on its government affairs team. So then, on a federal level, understanding how policy affects a Fortune 500 company in 49 of the 50 states that they had operations in, but decided want to come back to Florida because there was so much change and opportunity in Florida and still is. And I had a mentor, my former boss, the Florida CFO, who said, we really needed progressives in Florida to change the course of the state. So came back, worked on a state Senate campaign, and now I've been 3 years at State Innovation Exchange. And for those of you who are hopping on now, I work to support our progressive state legislators here in Florida and supporting them, making sure that their capacity needs are met.
Excellent.
I try to keep that as short as possible.
That was perfect. Okay, Amber, if you don't mind, just a little brief background in your path there.
Yeah. So I will say I was one of those people who went straight from undergrad to grad school. I went to Howard University, had all intentions of taking a year off and like working or figuring out my life. But economic downturn, there were no jobs to be had. So I went straight to grad school, which actually turned out to be a very good thing because I actually, like Billy noted, I actually took one of those unpaid internships as a grad student. I interned at State Department. And it was great. I was still in school, and the school actually supported me by giving me a few scholarship dollars.
Oh, good.
During that time. So I was doing classes and also interning, and they gave me a little bit of a stipend. So that was helpful.
Good.
Then towards the end of my program, I did the Boren, and let me back up actually. So after I mostly finished my program and I was truly job searching and was having a hard time, but in the same time, I was in the process for the Boren, waiting to hear back. And luckily I got it at around the same time that I found out I also had got an internship for a government organization, for Department of Justice. Gotcha. And just like James mentioned, actually, that one was a paid internship. So that was the last time I was doing unpaid was with State Department. So there are paid internships out there, and I highly recommend you guys look for them because working unpaid is difficult for anybody, let alone a student. Absolutely. But yeah, so after getting that internship, which was paid, I started directly after my Boren finished. And honestly, I've been working in the government ever since then, working on these same kind of national security topics, and it's been about 6 years now. I've moved around a little bit within the government and working on different topics, but that's one of the pluses about working for a large organization like this. You can work on a lot of different topics without having to switch jobs or having to search for new jobs. So I've been able to work on cyber issues, on Middle East issues, on East Asia, all kinds of things without having to start over completely from the beginning.
Right, excellent. And you've been working for them for how long?
6 years.
6 years now. Oh, wow.
Actually.
Wow. Fantastic. Okay. We'll get to the other questions in the chat in about 15 minutes or so. I've got a list of questions I need to go through here. Also, perhaps James, you could start. We'll just kind of ping back and forth between you guys. Let's do the same question for both of you. Have you experienced any sort of misses or failures, if you will, in terms of your career, or if there were certain career trajectories that you were going down and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that, or whatever it was? Can you speak to those things? And I guess more importantly, how did you overcome them? How did you continue to go forward and just kind of plow ahead after getting distracted there? Yes.
Sure, that's a great question. And something I left out earlier when I was talking about my career so far. I actually left politics to work in banking for a couple of years. I went into retail banking, served as assistant vice president and branch manager at a small community bank here in Florida. And it was just because I was so burnt out from politics, right? And so my advice to everyone who's young in their careers and willing to take risk, really take the time to figure out what it is that's important to you, what values are important to you. For me, when I left a campaign, what I realized was important to me was having some sort of work-life balance, right? I didn't want to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on a campaign. I wanted to have that personal time. And then funny enough, when I was in banking, I had too much personal time, right? So finding a job and a role that would help strike that balance was important to me. But also realizing, hey, like banking wasn't the right field for me when I was in it 2 years, and that was fine for me to be in it for 2 years to understand that, right? And for me, it was a lesson that I learned, that I loved interacting with my clients and understanding what the community needs are, but I didn't like the sales part of the job, right? So And I pivoted back to policy, but I knew I did not want to go back to a campaign job, but I wanted to work with community organizations and legislators and building those relationships and bridging those relationships between the two different entities. So for me, for my 20s, my entire 20s is really figuring out what it is that I wanted to do and how did I want to apply my degree and my skill set.
Yeah, I mean, and it typically takes often, that long. If people kind of know what they want to do, and they have a one path, and then there's people who kind of go here and then go there, and I did that. I tried a bunch of different things, and it wasn't until I was probably like 30, 31 that I kind of figured it out after trying this. And,
that's my age, Sean. So you hit it right on the nail.
Right. So you figured it out just in time. So Amber, how about yourself in that regard?
Yes, so many failures. Wow.
That's okay. You learn from them all, for sure.
You do. Actually, I'll mention two major ones here. One of them I think will be very useful for students right now. I had applied for the Wrangle Fellowship while I was in college. I did not receive it. So my first thing is, if you don't receive these prestigious fellowships, don't feel like it's the end of your career. It is one of many. You can keep going. And so for the Wrangle Fellowship, I was actually very close to receiving it. And I know this is the Wrangle Fellowship, for those who don't know, is actually hosted on Howard's campus, the Ralph Bunche Center. So I was able to communicate with the folks who run it before and after, and they gave me like feedback and told me where I was in the rankings. And I was like the second or third on the wait list.
Right.
So I was like, oh, so close. But I didn't receive that one. And secondly, one that I mentioned previously was coming right after grad school and trying so hard to find a job living in DC, making minimum wage. I think I was working for the 930 clubs. I was making like $9.25 an hour and trying to find a job in my field. And I just was not getting any bites. And I eventually did get a call back for one fellowship that I was really excited about. It was focused on Asia. And I was like, oh, great. They called me back for an in-person meeting. And then I never heard from them again. So, the reason I mentioned both of those is because those are going to happen, particularly for people who are trying to work in DC. You will not always get a call back to find out how you did on the interview or anything like that. Sometimes people just don't contact you again.
Yeah.
But the positive about pushing through for those things and continuing to apply and not really letting that one thing kind of stick to you, just kind of brushing it off, is that something better comes along. So after I didn't get the Wrangle Fellowship, one of the positives was one of the people on the panel for judges was actually a recruiter for Maxwell. And then I got home and I realized that she had written me a personalized letter which offering me scholarship money to attend their school for grad school. So I got money for grad school by applying for Wrangle. And then for the fellowship, I didn't get that fellowship. And eventually I was kind of in that waiting game I mentioned, but it was after that failure that I found out that I got the Boren Fellowship, which was a lot more money, a lot more fun. I didn't have to be in DC.
Right.
And Sean, actually, Amber's story, if I may just take 4 minutes, Amber's story reminded me of another story of a failure, right? I applied for the Truman Scholarship when I was a junior. And I was, I think, one of 2 or 3 students from the University of Florida who, made it to the last round where they fly you to one of the locations across the country. And I always love sharing this story because Stacey Abrams was in my interview. In Atlanta, she was one of the 4 judges, and I didn't get the Truman Scholarship. And looking back, it was a lesson for me, right? Because during the entire interview, I was just nervous and thinking about, what do I need to say, or what do they want me to say? And so my entire thought process is how just thinking about what do they want me to say, and then how can I relay that, right? Instead, what I should have been doing better was sticking to my policy proposal and really showing them why I was so passionate about this and why it was so important for the future of our country, right? Or whatever the policy proposal was that I submitted. And so being sure about, who you are and what your values are and why you care about something is really important in whatever policy or whatever fellowship or scholarship you're applying to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think thank you for that point, James. It's such an important point because I think, we go into these, applying for a fellowship and you're interviewing for this job or internship, you're often, it's easy to try to kind of think of, okay, what do they want to hear? You research this person on LinkedIn, you've researched this company, and now you have this sort of preconceived notion of what they think you think what is the right answer for them. At the end of the day, the best really approach is just to be honest, right? And if you're honest about what you yourself and what you believe in, what you're putting out there in the world, yeah, it'll come back to you, and it will your natural passion for what you do will kind of shine through, right? So instead of kind of coming up or thinking, well, what do they want to hear? Focus on what you want to tell them, right? And again, your natural passion for what you want to do will just kind of shine through, and they'll see that enthusiasm on you, whatever it is, whatever your mission may be. So thank you for that. Excellent. Okay, so moving on. I'm curious. In terms of, have you had any sort of anxiety around applying for some certain things? If so, how did you sort of overcome those barriers or fears? Were there certain graduate schools, or were certain organizations where, let's say it's the Department of State, for example, where it's tough to pass the exam and you have to get this amount, so I'm not gonna even bother. Like, were there any hurdles like that you found on your career path where you're like, I'm not gonna go for it, it's too difficult, why even bother competing for that role? Any situations like that, and how did you kind of overcome that anxiety and push through?
I can jump in really quick on this one. As I was thinking back, I realized there was a lot more anxiety when I was first starting out and trying to apply versus when I've applied for things later on in life. And I think that's partially just because you have that security. Once you have a job, if you're applying for another job, you're like, well, if I don't get it, whatever, I'm still getting paid, it's fine. So
true, it's very true. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm sorry to mention that, like, for the students here who are just starting out, but I mean, it does get easier, it gets less anxiety inducing. But I also want to, something I realized, and I know people have their opinions about Sheryl Sandberg right now, but reading her book Lean In back when it came out was a game changer for me.
Really?
It really was. Like, and I still remember like specific, some of the specific things she mentioned in there. One of them being that like men will apply for a thing if they fit 40 or 60% of the application versus women wait until they reach 100%.
Interesting.
And reading that, I was like, my God, I'm applying for everything. It really made me just realize, like, step forward and do it. And yes, like, I really think that has some really good nuggets just for me, just in terms of overcoming anxiety about how I might appear in a certain space or about being the only one in a certain space.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I definitely have implemented a lot of the things in that book in my life since then, and I just go for it.
Awesome. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, James, but thank you.
Yeah, I'll plus one to what Amber said about just go for it, right? I've sat on hiring committees, and a lot of times the candidate pool just isn't really big because there are a lot of people who think they need to check, again, all the boxes, right? And it's like, no, if you even have a majority of the things, then of course you'll be considered, right? And a lot of people don't realize that, especially people of color, they think they need to check every single box, and it's just not to be the case. You will never find a job applicant who will check every single box,
absolutely,
right? And otherwise, they're probably overqualified for that job, and they will probably leave that job in 6 months to a year, right? The other piece of advice I would say is, if you feel like you're not quite good enough for that job yet, think about what your quote unquote deficits are, right? And think about what story you want to tell that potential employer or that graduate school of how you're going to overcome that, right? So when I applied for my current job, I was probably 26, 27, and it was a state director job. And there was someone definitely who had all the connections with all the state legislators. But it's important for me, when I went into my final interview, I said, you could hire someone like that, or you could hire someone who, has a little bit of those connections and is able to build those connections along the way. But that person that you're probably considering, the other person, doesn't have your relationship with the larger ecosystem, which I think is more important to the foundation of your work, right? And so really providing that different perspective to a potential employer or a grad school that they might have not had thought of.
Excellent. Fantastic. Okay. Regarding sort of intangibles again, can you provide, in your own experiences, are there any experiences that you think that students don't normally assume count but that in fact actually help them sort of stand out from the rest of the pack. So for example, just simply being a first gen student, right? And the determination it takes to do that. Working in the service sector, working, volunteering somewhere, perhaps. Oftentimes those things are considered, or perhaps not as important. But for me personally, I think they speak to one's character. So can you talk about that? Are there any sort of other, again, intangible things that a type of work that doesn't traditionally fall into what one would normally think about, work in terms of tasks and responsibilities that you think could help one shine or stand out from the rest of the pack when applying for applications or your job and internship interviews? James first, perhaps? Oh, thanks.
So something that I think about is, as someone who went directly from undergrad to grad school, thinking about your lived experiences are very real experiences, right? I think as students of color, as students who might have immigrant parents, I think being a student of color and a child of immigrants is a full-time job in itself, right? A lot of times you have to call the bank or the insurance companies and deal with them, and that is very real experience that I think you can apply to the quote unquote real job, right? When you're able to tell folks, this is how I deal with XYZ relationships, or this is how I've navigated hurdles. This is how I've gone creative, right? And the more important thing, I think, as someone who's working in public policy is translating that to, here's what I've seen firsthand on the public policy obstacles that I'm trying to fix and work on as a public policy or public service servant.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think James really hit the nail on the head too with that one. Personal skills are transferable from any kind of job you're doing, and everybody will not have those interpersonal skills. So I think that's a major thing. But also, like, a lot of students will say, oh, I did this internship, but it's an internship and it wasn't a real job. But maybe you were managing a project, maybe you were leading a team, maybe you were doing administrative management issues that somebody had to be able to manage those things. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's just scheduling, maybe it's organization. All those things are transferable to any kind of job. And I feel like you can write to those kind of things, even if it's not necessarily like in the field that you want to be in. You can always speak to or write to those type of things. Like if you're talking about, if they ask you, how did you manage a problem? It doesn't have to be a problem that's related to international relations. It can be a problem like James mentioned. Maybe you had to call the bank and deal with something, or it could be a problem that you solved for your supervisor at your internship. There is a lot of things are more transferable, I think, than people realize.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That point about well, it's just an internship, right? Well, it's like, no, well, actually, most internships, particularly in the United States, you are learning on the job, right? So you are doing the job. Maybe not you're not sitting in on meetings with different sales directors or high-level clients, but if you, like you said, if you've completed a project, if you led on a certain task or created a new way of processes or something like that, those are all tangible things that people obviously do in the full-time work world. Okay. Please. Yeah.
And oftentimes it's not about the actual work that you did, but your problem solving skills, right? Or how creative you thought outside the box to solve that problem, right? Or how you approached an issue, or like Amber said, how were you working with others to solve this problem, right? They want to see that you're a team player. Yeah, so it's again those intangible skills that they want to see versus the actual work. They're less concerned about that usually.
Absolutely. Okay, just one more question for me before we open it up to the rest of the folks. So tell me, you mentioned, James, you've been on hiring committees before and so forth. When you guys sort of are evaluating candidates for opportunities, whether it be full-time people or perhaps interns as well, what do you typically like to see? Maybe name 2 or 3 things that you really like to see on an application, sort of generally, that kind of speak to you. You see that, you're like, okay, this person can do the job. Amber first, perhaps?
Sure. I will say, as a caveat, I am not the best person when it comes to looking at resumes. Resumes, to be fair, I'm not hiring for like a job where people have required education or things like that. I know if I'm hiring for something, it's either outside of work or it's like a volunteer position, something like that.
Okay, perfect, no worries.
So resumes don't mean much for me. However, what I do like to see when people write about themselves, like a cover letter or answering short questions, I like to see enthusiasm. That is my favorite thing. Enthusiasm is the first one. The second one is being able to seeming like you can take the initiative. So I feel like with those two things together, you can go far.
Yeah,
the person's excited about a topic and that they're like, oh yes, I like this idea, and also I have this idea to implement. And I think those two things together, that everything else you can learn on the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have that enthusiasm, you'll follow through. Right? You'll make it happen. Right? Like you said, you'll take the initiative, and that that's often more important than GPA or what they learned in course. Right? It's like, okay, there's something else there. There's a drive there, which is equally, if not more important. Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's open it up to other questions.
James might have a answer than me though, since he's actually done hiring.
I was just gonna say.
Oh, I'm sorry, James. Yes, please.
No problem, Sean. I was just going to say I really look for someone who's actually read the job description and what we're looking for, right, and translate that to the cover letter. So I've seen people just submit cover letters that you can tell they just change the name, and I mean, like attention to detail is good, right? But also, like Amber said, like that enthusiasm comes across about why you want this job, but more importantly, why do you want to work in our organization and be part of this team, right? And what you can bring to it, and also what you hope to learn. Because if you're one of those people that's like, I can do all of this, but then leave me with nothing about what you want to learn and what you hope to learn from your potential colleagues, then you're not really coming here to learn as well, right? So you've got to bring skills to the job, but also this eagerness to learn and be part of the team.
Yeah, and just from a career services perspective, it's so key to make sure you're personalizing every cover letter, every resume as well, right? So not only should you not have a generic cover letter where you're just kind of switching up a date and salutation, right? You want to make sure, just like you said, you're lining up and you're using some of the same language in the job description that's being used in the cover letter, right? It's very key. Yes, please.
Sean? Yeah. Just in terms of resumes, and I apologize to students for what I'm about to say. You have to have different resumes for different types of jobs. I have a job, I have a career, I have 4 different resumes. I have my internal resume, I have a federal government resume, I have a resume for that I haven't updated recently, but for part-time jobs when I was working part-time jobs. And I have a resume for outside of government. So all these things focus on something different. Some of them are more focused on Asia, some of them are more focused on program management. So depending on what you're trying to focus on, what you're applying for, you might need to have a different resume.
Yeah, thank you for making that point and going down that, because I think people just think of that in terms of cover letters, personalization, but you really need to do that for resumes and have, like you said, you don't have to have necessarily 20, but having anywhere between 4 and 6 for different fields that you might be interested, or roles or organizations, that sort of thing. To have them at the ready is also okay. So let's jump in. We've got about 15 minutes left for some questions from the folks. So first one here, I don't know if you answered this one already, but let me just start from the top. It seems like all internships in the public sector are unpaid, therefore segregating society. For example, the State Department internships are unpaid. The White House internships are unpaid. The United Nations internships are unpaid. If someone can't afford to do those things, they are more concerned with survival, not just working for a job in the private sector. So yeah, can you guys, unpaid internships, it's reality. At Fletcher, we're lucky, at least in the graduate program, to provide some funding. Usually awards in around sort of the $2,000 range. But can you speak to that? I hear this person's frustration. It's real. How do you do that? Are you able to kind of do this important work, but then also not have to about your own survival in the meantime?
So Sean, I think that's a very great question. And it's probably the reason why I never actually worked on the Hill, right, or in DC, because I just knew I couldn't afford it. What I will say is I think there's a more intentional effort from organizations that are focused on students of color now these days, that are trying to make it more affordable, right? So, and I think Carmen's dropped a few links like APEX, Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Institute. They all have fellowship programs that will, that either pay you to work on the Hill or highly subsidize those programs. So it makes it more accessible for students of color to participate. And there are a lot of, year-long fellowship programs too for students who are, fresh out of undergrad, who are looking for their first opportunity, right? I think I applied as a senior in undergrad. I think I applied for the Emerson Hunger Fellowship, right, in DC. It doesn't pay a whole lot, but it was enough for me to make it through DC if I had gotten the fellowship. And I know another one is the New York City Urban Fellows. They get you into city government.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those resources.
The only thing I would add is that there are a lot more paid federal internships than people realize. Not all of them are going to be able to be found on USA Jobs. If you go to their specific website for whichever government agency you're looking for, very often their internships will be paid.
That's great. Okay, next question. What are some tips for maintaining professional relationships once they've been built? Namely, once you matriculate or leave a job and no longer interact with these colleagues anymore, what's your best piece of advice for staying in touch with these individuals in the future?
I actually recently had a conversation, maybe about a year or two ago, with one of my mentors about this, because I was leaving that office and I was worried about losing these connections. And what he said to me was very apropos. He said, if the relationship is important, it'll remain, right? If you guys are definitely communicating, if you have this kind of relationship, you're able to sustain it. And so these days, for people who I'm no longer working with, maybe I'll just message them to get coffee. I'm like, oh, okay, I have a free time, you have free time, let's do coffee. Or sometimes I'm messaging them just to ask them a question. So the main point is, don't be afraid to just reach out, even if it seems like kind of a random reach out. Every once in a while, I email my favorite professors from college. Just as, hey, this is what I'm doing. How are you doing?
That's
just
great.
Updated. I mean, people, and they'll respond.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll jump in on that one real quick. I always recommend to students in terms of kind of keeping that network alive, because you do want to keep it sort of alive, right? Every 6 months or so, I usually say either at the beginning of the summer or usually around the holidays is a good time to kind of reach out. If you want to do it on a consistent basis, if there's somebody who's not in your sort of immediate network that you're talking to regularly, but you still want to kind of make a connection with them, very appropriate, either again, sort of during the holiday season, December to January, or I think more towards kind of the beginning of the summer, roughly, to kind of just set a quick note on LinkedIn. Hey, how's it going? I'm here now, or I'm doing this, or hope all is well with the family. It doesn't take a lot. It can just be a few lines, but you're kind of, again, you're keeping that network alive in the event if there's somebody at an organization that you see yourself working in someday. It won't be like this 2 or 3 years that have gone by. Like, what's this person? Oh, he's just getting in touch with me for that, right? But if you kind of do this, just maybe a couple times a year, and if once a year at the least, perhaps around the holidays, that kind of keeps it going. So it's not as awkward when you perhaps want to reach out to them for reference or whatever it might be. Not sure if you have anything to offer there, James, but if not, we can just jump to the next question. When applying for jobs as professionals of color in this industry, you think inputting your gender and/or race harms helps the application? Helps the application? I'd love to know your thoughts.
I'm assuming this person meant like the boxes that ask you what your race is, if that's not required, but okay.
I think that's
so
probably
my personal take is that I think it is a benefit versus a hindrance. I think we're living in a society right now that is, valuing diversity more and more, whether people are genuine about it or just trying to fill quota boxes, right? But I think people are starting to realize that, diversity in all shapes, forms, and sizes are a benefit to their corporation, their organization, the government. So I think it's actually a benefit, in my opinion. But I also think that, when you take that box, whether you choose to or not, even talking about your lived experiences is important, because it informs how you can bring those experiences to really be an asset in their organization.
You're making that connection, Steve. Yeah. Any thoughts there, Amber? If not, all right, I can continue on.
I agree with
Okay,
James.
perfect. Let's see here. One question we often get is how. If you're pivoting into something new or coming from another field, how can you explain those pivots? Right, so I guess, how do you explain those sort of transitions in your life? How do you go about that, I guess?
I'll let James handle this, since I haven't really had many pivots in my career.
Right. Which is great. Yeah.
Sean, can you repeat that question for a second?
Sure. I'm just going to read it here again. It goes, one question we often get is how. If you're pivoting into something new or coming into some other field, how do you best explain those pivots?
Sure. I think number one, don't get angry, don't get mad, right? And I think when you're in your 20s, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, like, tried something and this just wasn't for me, or I wanted to gain a new skill set, right? And the opportunity that I was in just didn't necessarily provide that skill set. I'm trying to diversify my skill set, right? And that's why I've done X, Y, and Z. And here's what I've learned from it, right? I think employers are more interested in knowing that, you did something, you learned something, and here's how you strengthen your skills, rather than, hey, I just took time off and didn't work for 2 years or whatever the case may be, right? But that you're actually taking the time and doing something useful with it.
Perfect. This question is for Amber specifically. How to best utilize your time abroad as a Bourne Fellow that can further prepare you for federal service? Kind of get that question there. So I guess best, how do you utilize your time abroad as a Bourne Fellow that you can further prepare you for federal service? I guess, what did you learn from the Bourne Fellowship that you can apply, or that has been applied in your?
Yeah, and for those who don't really know, the Bourne Scholarship and Bourne Fellowship are basically programs that pay for students to go abroad and learn the language intensively. That's the basics of it. So when I was applying for my Bourne, I was thinking about this, and that was actually the main reason I applied also for an internship at the same time. I felt like being able to say I worked overseas in an international environment would be very helpful for me for what I wanted to do when I'm in my career coming back. I also say, when you're doing your Bourne, lean into it. Don't go abroad and hang out with a lot of other expats. That's not going to help you learn the language you're going to end up speaking way too often. Versus you're talking to a lot of natives, or you're doing classes with natives, or you're going on trips with native speakers, you're going to have a much higher language level when you come back, which will also be helpful for you for federal service, because a lot of agencies need foreign language speakers. Whether you be a language analyst, or if you want to do something else and just also say, I can also speak or read or listen to this language and understand it, that's very helpful.
Just quickly back on the Bourne, there's another quick question that came. It says, does the Bourne Fellowship pay for your master's degree?
No, so the Bourne Scholarship is for people who are in undergrad. Bourne Fellowship is for people who are already in their master's program, and they pay for your dues when you're overseas. So basically, you submit to them a budget of how much it's going to cost for your program, and if you are selected, they give you the money to go and do that thing. But it will usually cover your classes, or your living expenses, and some people do research, so it should cover those kind of things, but not your actual degree itself.
So Sean, can I
Yes,
take a moment
please.
of share? So Billy, I think I kind of understand what's driving a lot of your questions here. So I want to make sure that folks, and Carmen dropped the link to the PPIA fellowship. So PPIA is a network, or what we call a consortium of public policy graduate schools. So I think Fletcher is part of the consortium, right? And a lot of times, if you're able to get a PPIA fellowship in your junior year in undergrad, a lot of times when you apply for public policy school or international affairs school and you're successfully able to get in, you're a PPIA alum, a lot of schools will offer you a full ride plus a stipend on top of that, right? So for example, when I went to the Humphrey School, I got a full ride and they gave me a $20,000 stipend, right? And that was the only way I could afford graduate school. I know people who've gone to Harvard Kennedy School who've gone full rides. I believe Princeton pays for all of theirs, or helps a lot, every student they have meet their needs. And Carnegie Mellon, if you're a PPIA alum, Carnegie Mellon at this time I still believe gives full rides to the PPIA alum. So it's a program that is worth looking into if you still qualify for it.
Wow.
To add to that,
please.
Maxwell is the same. I'm not sure if they do it the PPIA, but they do try to meet the needs of as many students as possible, whether you're on campus or in the DC location. Also, Pickering and Wrangell fellowships will pay for you to go to a master's program. Those are, after you do that, you owe 3 years with State Department, but if that is in your interest, they will cover your master's degree.
Excellent. Okay, guys. Well, actually, just one last question in the chat here, kind of just a general question. It says here, it's really disheartening to see, this is also from Billy, really disheartening to see mainstream politician senators all millionaires, though. It still seems like a rich person's club. Is there any, given your respective backgrounds and your, success in politics, respective success, any words that help with this I guess this reality, quite frankly, what would you say to that?
I'd say we're at a turning point in our political climate, right? Where like we're having this awakening, right? And I think that there are a lot of programs out there. One of them that I'm part of is New Leaders Council, and it's geared toward the young progressive leaders. Where we train our fellows to learn how to fundraise, right? A lot of times, until we can end Citizens United, we have to fundraise to be able to pay for TV ads, mailers, and such things, right? To get your name out there. But there are programs that equip fellows to be able to fundraise, to run, to learn how to run as a candidate, right? So that we're changing who's in office to really change how our structures work.
And I'll just toss out there, federal government is not a rich person's club. Maybe the political appointees are a little bit different. Being just a regular hired gun. I mean, I still have student loans, which luckily right now I don't have to pay for because, they've been signing them off for a while. I'll look at that again in a couple of months. But I understand like what Billy is saying, and I think James gave a lot of really good ideas and things to look into, but federal government, I will say, though it is not, federal government will not be the highest paying job you can get if you say, particularly if you say, like computers, something like that. However, it will be a steady job and you will constantly get paid, and you'll usually be able to get promotions much more easily than people in the private sector. So I started out as a GS9. Well, technically my internship, I was like a GS8 or GS6 or something like that. Not much money. But I started as a GS9 and I got a promotion or a monetary increase every year since I started, because they generally try to keep you up with inflation, but also you normally get a step increase. It's not a great increase every year. So if you do get into government, into one of those agencies that works like that, it is very helpful in helping you kind of stabilize yourself as a young adult.
Excellent. Okay, we're coming up close to 2 o'clock. At this point, I think it's probably best. I think those are pretty much all the questions in the chat. I think it's probably best we wrap up. And I just want to give my own personal thanks to the speakers. First time I've met you guys, and it's great. You've backed up a lot of the things I've said to students over these past 6 months at Fletcher, and so much appreciated.
I want to add my thanks to that. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sean, for all of this wonderful advice. I think what you all have shared really touches on a lot of the themes we've heard this week. Instead of thinking about a brand or a name of one particular thing, thinking about the kinds of problems you want to solve and how your experiences can contribute to solving them, thinking about how you tell your story and connect it to these larger issues, and then thinking about all of the different opportunities that are out there. So Amber and James, you didn't intend to, but this has been such a wonderful culmination of this week that we've been a part of. And to all of the folks on the line, as I said, this is the beginning and not the end. So we are here as a resource for you. I wanted to share the APSIA website, of course, which has links to many of the things that our colleagues have talked about. You'll also get an evaluation form shortly, so let us know what you enjoyed about this week and where we can continue to improve. I hope you'll stay in touch with us and visit the YouTube page for any recordings in case you need to refresh all of this wonderful advice and insight and stories that you've had. And thank you, Amber, very much for sharing your LinkedIn profile with our attendees. So thanks to everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend wherever you are. And we're so grateful that you have been a part of APSIA's 5th Annual Diversity Forum this week. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Nice meeting you all.